Welcome into a Tuesday, January 21st edition of Daily Faceoff Live, streaming live over on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, where we are looking for your inbox questions for later on. So drop those in with the hashtag askdfo. The show, as always, is a presentation of Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Mr. Saravalli, how are you doing here on a beautiful Tuesday?
I'm good. A little cold over here in Philly. It's, I think, 12 degrees today, minus 17-ish Celsius. So about as cold as it gets here. Yeah,
I was going to say a rare day where it is much warmer in Edmonton than it is out in your neck of the woods. So score one for Canada on that one, I guess. We got our Dominion Lending poll question up in the YouTube chat. You can have your say over there. Also, our boy Steven Ellis is going to swing by in a little bit with his new draft rankings. But first, Frank, let's talk about the story that is dominating the headlines, dominating the conversation on Twitter and X.com or wherever you get your hockey news. It's the 3-game suspensions given out to Tyler Myers and Connor McDavid. Matching suspensions. I kind of felt like from the jump, it made sense for the Department of Player Safety to just say, both you cross-checked someone in the head, you're both getting 3 games. As we talked about yesterday, I thought like maybe a case for Myers to get more because it was unprovoked, but also the McDavid reaction to just a minor penalty was clearly over the top. I also thought it could have been 2 games each. You could have said, hey, neither of you are playing in the rematch, then forget about it. You don't play for a while. But what did you make of 3 apiece?
So I didn't have any issue with the suspensions being matching length. To your point, a cross-check to the face is a cross-check to the face. However, I felt like for both players, this was 1 game too many. And I'll take it back to some of the commentary that I had yesterday. There needs to be more accountability for the officials on the ice. There was a wrestling match in the middle of the slot for 20 seconds prior to the cross-check to the face. No one is absolving Connor McDavid of that. Not by any stretch. You cross-check someone in the jibs and you're getting suspended. No ifs, ands, or buts. However, he shouldn't have needed to take justice into his own hands because he was being mauled by Connor Garland, whose entire thought process is, hey, if I could just wrestle with the best player in the world for the last 10 seconds of the game, then I'm going to ensure a Vancouver Canucks victory. Why that wasn't a thought process, and I'm not saying just Garland, both players, even up, take them off the ice. Yet they let them play, and we hear nothing. No explanation, nothing since, no chatter about it. And then to get to the Department of Player Safety part of it, I just think this suspension, to me, this cross-check to the face is no different than so many others which have received 2 games. And the closest comparable to me is Austin Matthews in the outdoor game against Rasmus Ristolainen. Just as vicious, just as retaliatory, just as unacceptable. And yet Matthews gets 2 and McDavid gets 3. And the thought process of that is, well, because McDavid has a previous suspension history, never mind that it was 5+ years ago, never mind that it didn't involve a stick. Because of that, excuse me, therefore, we run into a spot where McDavid ratchets from a 2-game suspension to 3. There's not much of the process that I agree with. And I think the disappointing part, to add another layer to it, is that it's entirely a waste of time and resources to even bother appealing, because the suspension will be served by then. And what you could only hope to get if somehow the commissioner were to go against his own employees would be a 1-game reduction, which would result in $65,000 back in your pocket.
Yeah. We've talked about this a bunch, and I know it's not like it's a pretty common take to kind of have, but the idea of like, hey, can we make officials available post-game to explain it, and not to put officials on blast, not to have a reporter sit in a room and grill them, but to use it as an education tool. And then you just talked, and you talked about this earlier in the season with the David Perron thing as well. Like, or sorry, maybe it was last year, sorry, with the David Perron thing. Like, the appeal process is so wildly broken. Is this anything that you think the league itself has a want to correct, or is this something the players are eventually going to have to push for in a CBA?
I think it's absolutely has to come down to the players. You need a more expedient process, and you need B, a completely independent process. How often is the commissioner, who I am 100% certain had eyes on the suspension before it went out and essentially tacitly approves it, why is it that the same person that's kind of approving it on the way out the door is then going to be the arbitrator involved in making a ruling as to whether or not the appeal should stand? I think they would have a lot of ammo to look at that exact same cross-check to the head from Austin Matthews and say, how does this rise to any different level than the Connor McDavid one from the other night? I just don't see a difference. And that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. And the other conversation, like we talked about officiating, you and Jason talked about officiating yesterday on the DFO rundown. We shared the stats. Connor McDavid, 197th in penalties drawn per 60 minutes. When you look at the 4 years before this one, he was right up there near the top of the league. He actually drew the most penalties in the league. The idea that this 3-game suspension is some sort of a shot at Connor McDavid or some sort of indication of how unfairly he's treated, I don't think they're connected. Like, I don't think you can look at this. You can't look at this 3-game suspension and be like, God, the NHL doesn't protect its stars. Like, no, he cross-checked someone in the head. You get suspended. Is it a game too much? Sure. The argument of the refs don't call McDavid the correct way or star players in general the correct way, that is also correct. Both are correct, but they're separate issues, Frank. The idea that the NHL shouldn't suspend Connor McDavid because he's Connor McDavid is just, you're out to lunch if you think that. If you think he should skip the 4 nations because he got a 3-game suspension, he cross-checked someone in the face. That deserves discipline.
Yeah, and I agree on all those points, and I think it's really well said in that these are 2 separate things. Accountability for officiating is over here, and process and punishment from Department of Player Safety is over there. Like 2 completely separate departments. They're not even housed in the same headquarters. It's totally separate. And aside from that, this whole notion that, Connor McDavid's going to suddenly act differently, that's not in his nature. And anyone suggesting 4 nations face-off, skipping that, you obviously don't know Connor McDavid, because that would not be bailing on the NHL shield. That would be bailing on your country.
Exactly. Let's continue along and stick in the Pacific Division, Frank, and talk about a result from last night that certainly stands out. I mean, hey, let's talk about results for the last 10 days for the Vegas Golden Knights. They got 4 losses in a row, 3 of them coming to non-playoff teams in the West in Chicago, Nashville, and St. Louis. If you look a little bit bigger picture, last 2 weeks, there's losses to the Rangers and Islanders in there. And is this one of those things, Frank, where we'll look back 6 weeks from now and be like, boy, weird blip for the Golden Knights, but they're still the Golden Knights? Or do you see some cracks forming here with this team?
The only thing that concerns me is that they really just haven't gotten the stops, and it's been all connected. Like, look at a lot of their offense. So they've lost 6 of 7. They did gain a point in one of those losses, a shootout loss to the Blues last night, but they've outshot their opponent in 6 of those 7. They've gotten a power play goal in 6 of the 7, including multiple in a 4-1 win against the Wild, the only win. So their power play has continued to hum along. Their scoring, for the most part, has stayed relatively consistent. What they're on right now is a PDO bender the other way. It's been really ugly the last, few weeks here. They haven't, they've had a couple games where they've been close to kind of not lucky or unlucky, but when you have a 4-0 loss to the New York Islanders and your PDO is 78.9%, like, that tells you you're not getting the stops. So, and you're not getting any breaks. So I don't think their process is broken. I think I tend to lean toward this is just a blip. And for one of the most consistent teams in the league, if not the most consistent team in the league to this point, no one's going to go through a pure 82-game run unscathed. It's just also more noticeable because the Oilers have been on heater and have now been in a spot where that division, which 1 week ago, you're looking at, a 6-point cushion for the Golden Knights, that's evaporated.
Yeah. So in the month of January, just to again throw people some numbers, they've played 10 games. Goals for 2.9, goals against 2.9, dead even. They're 4-5-1 in that stretch, and they're outshooting their opponents on average 31.9 to 23.5. They have the 4th worst save percentage in the NHL so far this month, and it's 2nd worst if you look just at 5-on-5. And Randy throws in a take here. The Thompson trade is looking really bad. I mean, I guess they got a 3rd-round pick there, and maybe there was a little bit of Thompson didn't want to play behind Hill, wanted a spot where he could look to be more of a number 1 or a 1B partner. But I mean, you look at how Ilya Samsonov's played and the way things are going for Vegas, I think it's probably fair to say they regret that deal, no?
Yeah, and I think the exciting part, though, is their goalie tandem can be reinvented this summer. Both guys are in the last year of their deals. There's many teams in the league, Utah, that like go through. They have both of their spots for next season up for grabs. That you could. There's going to be a ton of goalies available this summer, let alone some of the backups that are on expiring deals. Like it's going to be a free for all in the annual game of goaltending musical chairs.
Yeah, that Vegas crease could look a lot different. And speaking of looking a lot different, Frank,
And
Patrik
by the way,
Allvin.
both guys in Washington, Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren, are both up. Like there's a handful of teams in the league that have both spots open on the bingo card.
Yeah, Lindgren and Thompson are the best value combo in the NHL, but it will not stay that way. One of them has to get paid by Washington, you would assume, and the other one, like, probably can't afford to pay them both. So maybe something for our next conversation with Carter Hutton. Patrik Allvin out in Vancouver addressed the media yesterday. Frankie talked about a handful of things, including just how involved they are in the trade market right now. And he gave off the impression that, as always, the Canucks are not leaving any door unopened. They seem to be aggressive, and that's sort of their MO with him and Jim Rutherford. But what else stood out to you when Patrik Allvin spoke to the media?
Really, that we haven't learned much. We didn't run from the idea that there has been trade discussions, just said that it was kind of unfortunate that their names have been out there, which that's entirely within the Canucks' control. And it's abundantly obvious that they're trying to make something happen with JT Miller. And I think some of the pushback that I got was from the Rangers end was not so much that it was a clause that was related to a first round pick being moved, but that it was the Rangers not being willing to take on the entirety of JT Miller's contract that ended up being the hang up. So look, there's always pushback in terms of how close did something get? Was it really right there? Was it at the finish line? It's hard to say, but I think one of the big things, sort of propositioned at Vancouver was maybe we could revisit this if you're willing to retain money. But I think if you're looking at it from Vancouver's perspective, you're looking to get some assets back from Miller and then potentially use that cap space and the assets to then go out and get players or pieces that make your team better right now. And if you can't do it in one transaction, which I don't think they can. So that would kind of defeat the purpose of then taking on money from the Miller deal and for a long period of time. The point would be to move off of the contract entirely, which of course then limits and or damages your return. So look, I think there's a lot to unpack in Vancouver. I think a lot of these issues are self-inflicted and they've got a lot of work to do, because the other part of the press conference that wasn't really talked about nearly as much was, what does this all mean for Rick Tocchet, who's in the last year of his deal? Obviously there's a club option, but does Miller heading out the door, is everyone okay with that? He seems to me like a Rick Tocchet player. How does this entire team and situation move on? And can the Canucks regroup in time for the playoffs this year?
Yeah, another name that's out there, and like Tocchet in the last year of his deal, is Brock Boeser. And I thought Allvin had some interesting comments on Boeser as well. I know we talked about him a bit last week, but he started by saying, I wouldn't say there's urgency. I think we're still evaluating him. I have a great relationship with his agent. When the time is right, we'll make the decision. But it's the last line. He says, it's got to work for both sides long term. Anything can happen here any day. So again, he wouldn't say there's urgency, but then he ends it by saying anything can happen any day with Boeser.
Well, and you also heard Boeser say, though, that he thinks that the drama that's existed around this team this year has really seeped into this team's play. I would guess that would include himself. And so the next thing that I would ask is, does Brock Boeser still want to be part of that? He went out on a limb over the summer and to say, prior 2 summers ago, to say, I want to be here. But how would you feel if after 517 games in a Vancouver Canucks uniform and parts of 9 seasons to hear your GM say, we're, quote, still evaluating him? If you don't know now, then you don't know. And that also means you're kind of not getting a commitment from them either. So I think there's a lot to unpack there.
To steal a line from former Oilers GM Craig McTavish, if you have to ask the question, you know the answer. If you're still evaluating and asking questions at this point, then maybe you do know We're going to get to Steven Ellis in a second, but first, our deadline countdown article for today. People can go read it over at dailyfaceoff.com. But it was Matt Larkin taking a look at some potential destinations for Rasmus Ristolainen. Pat, you can throw up the board with just sort of the names and markets that Larkin had listed: Dallas, Detroit, Edmonton, Florida, Tampa, Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg. The interesting part with Ristolainen is obviously the term, $5.1 million, couple more years on that deal. I think Dallas stands out, but as Larkin points out, the Stars and Jim Nill traditionally very hesitant to attach a first-round pick. If that's what Philly wants, maybe that's not a fit, but Dallas is at the top of their board, and I think they do make the most sense.
They do, and I think so does Detroit. That Detroit blue line needs to vastly improve. I'm not entirely sold that Ristolainen is the piece to do it, but just by the nature of the Dallas Stars' right side, I think that's their huge hole. They've got tons of cap space to spend with the Tyler Seguin LTIR injury money, but that team needs to, they're a long way on the right side of their defense from being a true Stanley Cup contending blue line, in my view. And I think the big thing is, are you attracted to the term on his deal, or does it scare you away if you're Dallas? And I think that'd be certainly one thing to consider. He's got one more year after this. So is that right? 25, 26? No, 2 more years.
2 more,
so
yeah.
That's, look, I think the other part of this is you hear about the Flyers raving about him and John Tortorella, and he's given some full-throated responses on Ristolainen in the last few weeks. Do they have to move him? My answer would be probably not.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, with the term, you're certainly not forced to do anything. That $5.1 million cap, it also throws a wrinkle in. Like if he was a pending UFA and the Flyers put their hand up and said, hey, we'll keep $2.5 million and we want a first-round pick, like that almost feels like an easier deal than you have to take the $5.1 million. And like you said, is the term attractive or not to some of these teams? Because we've seen Ristolainen go through some tough stretches as well as he's played so far this year. He's had years where he's been really bad. So do you want to take that risk for 2 more seasons? I think it's an interesting kind of angle and wrinkle to throw into this whole thing with him. But
yeah,
I mean,
I would say my big thing with Ristolainen, and I mentioned this on your show, Oilers Nation Every Day last week, is I can't think of one team that Rasmus Ristolainen's ever played on that he's made better.
I think that's totally fair. Again,
he's 760 games into his career and has never played in a playoff game. Not saying that's all on him, but he's never really pushed a team and been a top end defenseman.
Yeah, and again, if he was a rental, I think there would be a team that would convince themselves, hey, let's see if we can catch lightning in a bottle. But the 3-year risk, I think, is just maybe a bit too much. Let's move along. Talk a little draft with our boy Steven Ellis. It's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, where you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks through the Charm Masterpiece program. You can also apply for a Charm Diamond Flexity card today and get approved for no interest financing on your purchase in minutes. For more information, go to charmdiamondcenters.com. Always a pleasure to welcome in our daily face-off prospect and draft analyst, Steven Ellis, to the program. And Steven, your new draft rankings is out now. Let's start right at the top. I got a couple of questions for you. 1, Matthew Schaefer is your number 1. How confident are you that he'll stay there? And 2, is there anyone else in the top 10 who maybe you're a bit higher on than most?
So it's a tough one there when it comes to Schaefer because he is going to be out long term. But talking to a lot of scouts, like they're saying the things you see in him are some of the same qualities that make guys like Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes so effective. Just the way he thinks, the way he moves, and the way, like when he left Canada's World Junior team with his collarbone injury, like you could tell the difference that blue line immediately felt, because just suddenly they lost a guy who was going to go out there and do pretty much everything important with the puck. So that was a tough one there. But I do think that Schaefer has a very good shot there. I think it really just depends on which team takes first. You know, I know a lot of people in Buffalo are wondering, like, oh, do we need to take another defenseman number 1? Like when we can get James Hagens, we can get a Michael Misa or Porter Martone. But I think if you're picking best player available right now, you don't find defensemen like Schaefer often. And I feel pretty confident that he would have been the first defenseman taken last year in a draft that was dominated by defensemen. Now, to kind of keep in that same conversation, you see Kashawn Aitchison there at number 7. He's someone I'm really excited about. I did a feature on him where I called him the Punisher, because this is someone who will go out there and just lay out the biggest hit you're gonna see. He'll then look around, ready to take on a fight, but no one wants to take him on. I actually asked a few players who wanted to stay anonymous, and they're like, we don't care if he just hit our best player. Like, I'm afraid of him. Like, we're afraid of him. We're not going after him because he goes out there with intention to knock you down, but then he's got the skill to go out there and beat you defensively and beat you offensively. So I got him number 7. Most people don't have him top 10. I wouldn't be surprised if he's taken in the top 5 because there's just no defenseman like him in this draft. He's kind of like if Radko Gudas had a lot more skill.
I was going to say the forward version or the defense version of Zach Kassian.
If Zach Kassian could also put up a bunch of points, which he did at points of junior.
He was a 20-goal scorer in the NHL.
Yeah. That's obviously not what we remember him for, but it's, when it comes to that, it's like, I think there's going to be a ton of teams looking at Aitchison and saying, like, he competes so hard every single shift, and physicality might not even be the biggest part of his game. That might be defensively, and that's important.
Okay, so as teams have conducted their amateur and pro scouting meetings the last few weeks, there's been some thought emanating that this draft class is deeper than originally thought. Is that accurate, or do you think we're just at a stage now where teams and yourself are falling in love with guys on the board?
I think it is a little deeper than most people, we're expecting here. And I think that's because you look at some big seasons out of guys like, let's say, Simon Wang, who's been playing with the Oshawa Generals, a guy that for his, he's 6'6", but he's super mobile. I don't think anyone saw a guy from the OJHL for at least the first part of the season going and being a potential first-round pick. Carter Bear's been dominant. You look at Nathan Bem out of Kamloops has kind of just come out of nowhere. Like, there's a lot of guys who are just, you look at the stats last year, you look at some of the elements of their game and say, okay, yeah, they're fine prospects, nothing special. But this was the hardest first round list I've actually had to make in a long time because it felt like there were just so many players that were kind of pushing their way in. And then you look at someone like Ivan Ryabkin, who a lot of people had as a top 5 pick, not even a first round prospect anymore. So I do think that there's a lot of competition, a lot more than people expected. And that's what you want, especially at the top where you can ask a ton of scouts to give their top 5 and you might get 5 completely different top 5s. That's exciting.
Yeah. So who would you say is the biggest riser from the last time you did the rankings?
Well, at least of anybody of note, it's got to be Carter Bear of the Everett Silver Tips. Just talking to some of his teammates, specifically Landon DuPont, the top prospect for 2027, they just look at how physically fit he is, all the attention to detail that he brings to his game. And then you see those numbers there where, he probably is going to get over 50 goals. He could get around 100 points this year. Like, such a productive player on an Everett team that is looking really good in the WHL. But when he's in the lineup, he makes them so much better. And I feel like we were robbed of getting to see him at his full health at the CHL USA Top Prospects game because he was sick for the first game and didn't play a lot in that second game. But he's so creative, so smart, and he's always working hard to get the puck. So originally, I wasn't sure if he was a first-round prospect. I got him at number 14 in my newest rankings.
I'll ask you the downer side of that question, I guess. Who's been the biggest faller since your last rankings?
Yeah, it's Luka Radivojevic, and you might remember that name because he's been in 2 World Juniors, but also his dad is a former NHLer in Branko Radivojevic. And when it comes to the style that Luka plays, there's the skill there. He's played a lot of minutes already with the Slovak junior team at different levels, and has always been one of their better players. And kind of almost like Aaron Kiviarju the last couple of years of Finland, he was always playing a ton of minutes and a lot of hype there, but in the end, we're talking about a 5'10" defenseman who doesn't throw a lot of hits, can make a bit too many mistakes. And I think we're talking about someone now who there was some first round pedigree, might be second or third at this point. There's still no question that he could be a skilled player, but I don't know how dynamic he is. It feels like his play can be a bit predictable at times, and he got exposed at that at the World Juniors. But at the same time, I thought he was one of Slovakia's better players. And is that an indictment on Slovakia? Maybe. But in the end, we saw someone who started the year in the SHL playing against men in Sweden, and now he's playing in the USHL. And it feels like after a great start, a bit of the hype has kind of worn off there. And again, the fact that he's not a big defenseman is not going to help him. Not everyone's going to be Lane Hudson out there.
And we got through another segment where we've learned a new word, the biggest faller in the draft. Way to go, Tyler.
All right. I'm sorry for that. Steven, even if the questions weren't great, the analysis was. Appreciate your time. Full draft rankings out now, dailyfaceoff.com. We'll chat with you again next week.
Yep. Thanks so much.
fall. It still makes sense in my head. I don't know. Anyways, poll question results for our friends at Dominion Lending Centers. Is your mortgage up for renewal? You can lock in the best rates by speaking with one of their mortgage experts over at dominionlending.ca. Who is going to finish first in the Western Conference in the regular season? Frank, the Oilers took 38.7% of the vote over on Twitter. They got 38% on our YouTube as well. It was the Jets coming in second, though. Are you surprised that the Jets got the nod from the public over, say, the Vegas Golden Knights?
I would not sleep on the Colorado Avalanche.
I don't mind that at all. They're plus 550 over on Bet365. Actually, third on the odds board there. It goes Oilers, Stars, and then the Avs. So two teams we didn't even have in here. So maybe the field needed a little bit more love in our poll. But over on Bet365, it is the Oilers favorited by the public as well. Let me give you an Ask DFO from the chat here, Frank. We got this one from Joe, who said, who will be the first out of Pittsburgh? There were some reports flying around yesterday that the Penguins and fire sale in the same sentence. I don't know if they're going to go that far, but is there anyone in Pittsburgh you're keeping an eye on?
Fire sale, in order for that to happen, you would also need to have teams that are interested in your players. So, I mean, aside from that minor hiccup, look, you can go through this process of elimination. I don't think any of the big three are going anywhere. Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. I think it's a real challenge to move Erik Karlsson's contract, and unless there's a real incentive that a team is willing to pay to make you retain half of it and knock him down to $5 million, which, yeah, I don't know. That might be a tall task. Outside of that, who are the players that are finding value? Where are you finding value in those players? I don't think it's with the contracts for Rust or Raquel. Obviously not Ryan Graves. Who's left? Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor? Like, I'm just, where's the fire sale? Who's clamoring? Who's beating down Kyle Dubas's door to do this?
I think that's a really good point. I haven't watched, obviously, a ton of Penguins hockey this year, but I thought I watched a few games earlier in the month, and then they played the Oilers. I thought Kevin Hayes actually looked surprisingly better than I thought he would. If you're Pittsburgh and you knock that down again, and it's all of a sudden $1.75 million for this year and next, I wonder if a contender wouldn't be interested in throwing Kevin Hayes, like good room guy, good bottom six guy. All of a sudden, the contract's very stomachable. Like maybe you could get a second round pick for a 50% retained Kevin Hayes.
It's another new word, stomachable. I love it. Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. But I think there's just a big question about where Kevin Hayes' feet are at this point. He's never been a burner, but can he keep up to be effective in the playoffs?
Mm-hmm. That's fair. Let's move along to our daily bets for the day, brought to you by Bet365. Download the app, use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I nailed my plus 500 parlay yesterday. Shout out to Austin Matthews and the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we'll look to keep it rolling tonight with a couple of road dogs in the NHL, starting with the Red Wings and Flyers. I don't know why, but I really like fading the Philadelphia Flyers. They haven't been a very good road team this year, under 500 on home ice. And the Red Wings, while they haven't been great on the road, better as of late. They lost 2 in a row, though, but I like the Red Wings in a get-right spot. And also, no Connor McDavid for the Edmonton Oilers. As much as this pains me, take the best team in the NHL when they're underdogs. The Washington Capitals, only team in the league to be north of 700 when it comes to their points percentage. No McDavid, that's a factor, but plus 120 Caps on the money line. I don't hate it at all, and it actually ties in nicely to
How often do you bet against the Oilers?
Because it's just plus 120. Like the Caps are the best team in the league and no Connor McDavid. Like that to me, the Caps should be favored here.
I don't hate the over 5.5 here.
That's probably a good point too, actually. Yeah. I don't mind the over. It ties in though, Frank. Alex Ovechkin coming to Edmonton. That's our garbage time for today because the Oilers opened up the vault a little bit for Ovi yesterday. They had him try on the old school gloves. He had an old school Wayne Gretzky jersey as well from the Oilers Hall of Fame. So a pretty cool stop for Ovechkin. I mean, this game came a little bit too early in the season, I guess, because it might have been cool if this was, in the middle of March and we were sweating out like, oh, if Ovi scores twice, he breaks the record or ties the record in Edmonton, but nonetheless, cool to see him rocking those old school mitts.
I love the respect between these two guys. When Wayne Gretzky is sending him messages of encouragement to get there and, fully believes that he's the greatest goal scorer of all time, and to see the respect obviously back the other direction that Alex Ovechkin has for Wayne Gretzky. It's how could you not be impressed? And it's a really cool little behind the scenes relationship that I think has really developed over the last 15 to 20 years that is part of what makes hockey so great.
How cool would it be if Alex Ovechkin maybe did his first couple of warm-up laps in those gloves today and was ripping around and ripping a couple pucks in those old school mitts? That'd be good. All right, that is a wrap on today's edition of the show. A pretty solid slate, including, yes, that matchup between Alex Ovechkin and Leon Draisaitl tonight in Edmonton. We will break it all down tomorrow, right back here at noon Eastern. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and enjoy the hockey tonight, everybody. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.